great to be here with you today. I didn't expect this many people. Just out of curiosity, how many people are here because it's required for a class? Nobody? What? I'm shocked. Well, this mic is giving some feedback. Are you working on that? Okay. If I knew Scott Phillips was here, I would have put some Shakespeare quotes in my presentation today. Is this because I'm standing in front of this mic here? Should I turn this off? About 3 weeks ago, I was struggling on what I should talk about today. They told me I could discuss anything I wanted. About 3 weeks ago, I settled in on this topic. And last week, Governor Herbert gave a speech about how Utah should be involved in nuclear power. And he said that we should open dialogue. So, as Dean Templin mentioned, this is kind of a controversial subject in some ways, but it should be fun to talk about it today. And I would encourage you, if you have questions or if I say something that doesn't sound right, go ahead and interrupt me. Just raise your hand. I'll be glad to address your question. So I thought the best way to do this is, first of all, give you a frame of reference. Just talk about the history of the nuclear industry, talk a little bit about what's happened in Utah, talk about the fuel cycle and what nuclear fuel is, just to give you a frame of reference. It seems to me that would be important before we discuss what the opportunities are. And so I'll end with economic opportunities and then go to conclusion. Nuclear power was first patented in 1933. Most of us recognize it as being very popular and a high-profile activity when the Manhattan Project was begun, which was a World War II project to create the bomb. A lot of that was done in New Mexico, and Utah played a big role in that, which I'll get into a little bit later. There's a large nuclear research operation outside of Idaho Falls, Idaho. It's a DOE installation. It's called INEEL, I-N-E-E-L. And actually the first nuclear reactor that provided power was up in that area of Arco. Idaho was the first town to have electrical power from nuclear. Just out of curiosity, how many of you think there's a nuclear reactor in Utah? Okay. Do you know where it is?
No, it could be a small research reactor at the University of Utah, or perhaps a hospital reactor. They're used for a lot more things besides power.
Your first one was correct. The University of Utah has a nuclear reactor. A lot of people don't realize that. People get a lot of really bent out of shape about some things, nuclear stuff going around, but we actually have a nuclear reactor in Utah, in downtown Utah. The first commercial plant was brought online in 1958. The U.S. at one time built 132 nuclear power plants. There are 104 in operation today. In the 1960s, there was such a fever over nuclear power that there was an estimate there would be 1,000 nuclear power plants by 2000. We have 104 today. So it'll be interesting to find out what happened. Here's a picture of where the nuclear power plants are today. Most of them are on the East Coast. Any idea why they're on the East Coast? Population. Power needs. What else? Water. Yeah, it's a big water hog. They're big water hogs. And there are more environmentalists on the West Coast. It wasn't really until the 70s that the health risks of nuclear power or nuclear energy were fully understood. In fact, here in Utah, is Gail Pollock here? I was hoping Gail would come. The head of the Utah Division of Radiation, whose name always escapes me, in the early 70s, they were still arguing that radiation wasn't dangerous. And he carried around a locket and a necklace on his chest to prove that radiation wasn't dangerous. He died of thoracic cancer. So that's sort of but really not till the 70s do we really fully understand. In fact, as all of you know, there was a lot of denial about the nuclear testing, especially its effect on people in southern Utah, which in some degree still goes on today. But there was huge denial until the 70s. All of a sudden, miners who were mining in the 50s and 60s started dropping off. They had leaking from tailings ponds. Tailings are byproducts of mining and milling ore. And then there were nuclear accidents. 3 Mile Island, most of you probably weren't even born in '79. I was going to check and see if on YouTube they had a copy of the old Saturday Night Live sketch with Dan Aykroyd and Garrett Morris on set on 3 Mile Island. Do you remember that? Where Dan Aykroyd was Jimmy Carter. Anyway, it's really funny. Both he and the maid who cleaned it up became huge 50-foot people. And then in 1986, Chernobyl in Russia, which was a very old generation nuclear plant, exploded. And that's actually the largest nuclear tragedy that's ever happened. 3 Mile Island, nobody was actually injured. They fortunately stemmed the damage pretty quickly. But from the 70s, from the mid-70s, there were no nuclear plants built. No applications made, nothing was going on. So the nuclear industry was essentially shut down other than regular operation and maintenance. There was no new activity, no permits being made. And because of that, the experts that were available in the 70s are all gone. Most of the qualified nuclear engineers and administrators and policymakers have retired. And so there's a vacuum right now in that. There's been activity and research on campuses, and actually in Utah, we have more qualified regulators in nuclear power than they have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We had a policy at the NRC where a state could become what's called an agreement state. And by doing that, they became the authorized agency which would allow nuclear activity within the state. They superseded, they took the place of the NRC. And Utah is one of those states. It's an agreement state. Our staff here at Utah is one of the most highly qualified group of nuclear regulators in the country. In the meantime, everybody else forged ahead. France, 75% of France's power is from nuclear right now. There's never been a major accident there. There's another country, I was going to look it up and I forgot, there's another country that's up in 80% with some, I can't remember what it is. And our power right now, we still have 17% of our power comes from nuclear. And then just in the last few years, we're rethinking it, and there's been a change. I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but I think the flashpoint for the nuclear renaissance was when uranium became a commodity. How many business majors do we have here? Somebody want to volunteer to participate here and tell me what a commodity is? I'm going to pick on you. You look like you know. Blue shirt. What's a commodity? Say, wait a minute, I wasn't expecting this. Think of gold.
I think commodities is something that people are searching after.
It's something that's traded. Okay? It's something that's traded. And so the marketplace recognizes that there's some value and there's money to be made by trading and having activity. And up until 2007, May of 2007, uranium was not a commodity in the world, let alone the U.S. Now, it was interesting, I'll get into that a little bit later, but that was the flashpoint that I believe ushered in the new era, because the marketplace recognized that things were going to happen. But in the meantime, we've had several energy crises. There's been no accidents in the U.S. for 24 years. And global warming escalated, or pollution escalated. In the 70s and 80s, there was concern about coal-fired plants because of noxious emissions, sulfur dioxide, poisons that came out. But now there's a real concern about carbon dioxide, which is not generally considered a huge pollutant, but now carbon dioxide has become the bad boy in the world, right? Which gets us into the controversial issue, especially in Utah, whether or not there's global warming. My answer to that is, I don't know if there's global warming caused by mankind or not, but we certainly aren't helping it any, right? A big step is that there was acknowledgement for the need for nuclear for environmental reasons by the Sierra Club, which was about 2-3 years ago. Many environmentalists have gotten on the nuclear bandwagon, but they, as often, a lot of environmentalists are conflicted. They don't support any of the activities that produce the fuel that provides nuclear, but they recognize nuclear power is better than coal power. There's a lot of talk about green energy, and it's real popular right now, but most experts think that if you were to provide power for the U.S., you need a grid 100 miles by 100 miles of solar panels, which is a lot, and probably would create other environmental concerns like habitat for turtles and things like that. And then there's a lot of issue about the aesthetics for wind turbines. You know, some people think they're eyesores. So I mentioned uranium became a commodity, and I'll get back into that a little bit later too. When it became a commodity, uranium went from $20 a pound to $140 in about 2 or 3 months. It went back down during the economic crisis a year or so ago, down to about 25 to 30, and it's hovering around 50 to 70 now per pound of yellow cake uranium, which I'll get into later. There are 442 plants worldwide. There are 65 under construction, planning for 100 more. And here in the U.S., there's a permitting process for 33 plants in the U.S. The biggest advancement in plants is in China, as you would guess, India, and Russia. One of the reasons that uranium became a commodity, and one of the side effects of uranium becoming a commodity, is that there became a shortfall of uranium. When I say uranium, I'm referring to yellow cake uranium, which is U3O8. It's the first phase in uranium production. Right now, there's 50,000 tons produced annually and 70,000 used, kilotons. In Cigar Lake, Canada, that was one of the major producers, and I think it was in 2007. And actually, the guy who helped dig that mine is a guy named Don Foote from Fruit Heights, Utah. They dug underneath the lake, and the lake crashed through and flooded the mine. So it created a huge shortage of raw uranium ore. Then there was hoarding by non-producing countries like Japan. Japan started buying up the stock. That's one of the reasons the price went through the roof. And then there's a program called Megatons to Megawatts, which I'm going to cover in just a second. And that ends in 2013. And then the other issue with uranium, raw uranium, yellow cake uranium, is that a lot of it comes from unstable countries. And so there's a real concern from U.S. power companies that they may not have a consistent supply of uranium. I just thought you'd find this interesting. A lot of people don't know about this. Megatons and megawatts was begun in 1994. It was an agreement that Russia would disable and dismantle and deblend 16,000 to 20,000 nuclear warheads. And they take 500 megatons, or 500 metric tons of bomb-grade uranium, and then it would be deblended down into fuel grade. And 10% of the electricity, 10% of the American homes in the U.S. have been powered by this in the last 10 years. This program ends in 2013.